California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are coming to you from Sacramento. You know him. His name is Scott Lay. He is with the Nooner. He is the editor of the Nooner, which you can find at aroundthecapital.com. And I thought we'd have some fun, talk about the upcoming June 3rd primary. In this portion of our program, we're going to be speaking about the statewide constitutional offices, of which there are 8, but we'll talk about 3 or 4 of them, if that's okay. I want to start with that quite remarkable race of Secretary of State. We would have thought that it would be a race between Alex Padilla and Leland Yee, both state senators, Democrats. Mr. Yee is no longer in the race.
Mr. Yee is no longer in the race. He has been alleged to have conspired to accept contributions for legislative action and other illegal activities. That'll play out in the courts. He has withdrawn from the race, but he still is on the ballot.
Right.
And those that actually will read the ballot pamphlet will read him as probably the most anti-corruption candidate, which there's a certain degree of irony in.
Sure.
With Yee out of the race, Alex Padilla becomes the Democratic favorite.
But do you believe that with Yee still on the ballot, a fairly well-known name, relatively speaking, and there's another Yee running for another office, so could he actually garner enough support to throw the race in a way that we wouldn't expect?
You know, it's more likely that Leland Yee's votes, he may pull away from some votes that might otherwise go to Derek Cressman, the second Democratic candidate in the race. So it actually may help Alex Padilla, aside from just not having the competitor in the race, but have Yee siphon off, votes that weren't going to go to Alex Padilla that might have otherwise gone to Derek Cressman.
I have to ask about Dan Schnur. We all know Dan Schnur, one of the best political operatives around. He is running not as a Republican, which he had been, but as no party preference.
I came to age in Sacramento when Dan Schnur was communications director for former Governor Pete Wilson.
Right.
He is an absolute master. He's been working as a professor at the University of Southern California. He decided to enter the race as a no party preference candidate, independent. And most people look at him and realize his time as chair of the Fair Political Practices Commission, he really did walk away from party politics. However, we have yet to see voters get behind a no-party preference candidate in any level of California office, and so it's a real test for Mr. Schnur.
And there is a Republican in the race, Pete Peterson, which presumably would be a problem for Mr. Schnur.
It certainly appears to be a problem. What we see with independent voters is they proclaim their independence, they don't register with a party, but they generally vote as their friends and neighbors do. And if you look at counties, Democratic counties, independent voters vote Dem. Same thing happens in Republican counties. And so Pete Peterson will get a high level of support and likely will edge Dan Schnur out of the top 2.
Is your anticipation the race will come down to in November, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Padilla?
I think that's the most likely scenario.
Let's jump to the controller's race where another Yee is running. Her name is Betty Yee. She's running against John Perez, who's the speaker currently as a Democrat, and the mayor of Fresno, Ashley Swearingen.
Ashley jumped in the race at the very end. It had really been seen to be a race between Speaker Perez and Board of Equalization member Betty Yee. But Ashley's entrance at the end almost assures that one Democrat will emerge on the June ballot, and if there is from the June ballot, and if there is any statewide race where a Republican has a legitimate shot come November, it is a state controller's race. Ashley is a strong candidate, and I think that Republican interests are looking at rebuilding the party, recognize that she could be a long-term investment.
I want to continue this conversation about the controller's race. I want to talk about the governor's race. For our viewers on HLN, we are speaking with Scott Lay. He is the editor of the Nooner. For our other viewers, we're going to continue this conversation, get Mr. Lay's views on that controller's race, on the governor's race. We'll be right back on California Edition. So let's talk, sir, about the 2 Democrats, John Perez, Betty Yee. Conventional wisdom might suggest that Mr. Perez, who has more money, should do better than Ms. Yee, who has less, but that Betty Yee campaign is quite scrappy. She managed to prevent the Democratic Party endorsement for Speaker Perez. Could it be that Betty Yee advances come June?
I think there's a very strong chance that Betty Yee would advance from June beyond the November ballot. I think that voters, particularly with the financial offices, like the background of somebody that's been on the Board of Equalization. You look at John Chung when he was elected to be state controller before.
From the BOE.
Came from the BOE. He got elected to the BOE after being chief of staff to Brad Sherman, who was on the Board of Equalization. I think with some of the financial offices, the voters are looking for people that may have a different skill set than managing legislation and doing the wonderful job that Speaker Perez has done.
Do you believe that Betty Yee's last name, being the same as Leland Yee, presents challenges?
No. I think that voters have shown also, a strong interest in electing Asian Americans to statewide office. I don't think there's any liability whatsoever to Betty by the Leland Yee situation.
In your mind, who do you believe would be the stronger opponent to Ashley Swearingen, Betty Yee or John Perez?
Well, that's difficult. Betty Yee will have a harder time raising money because raising money from being a Board of Equalization member.
Even if she winds up as the, quote, Democratic nominee?
Even if she winds up as Democratic nominee. This is not a race where there's going to be a huge amount of moneyed interest putting money in. There are significant roles, like being a member of the CalPERS, the Public Employee Retirement System Board, and the Teachers Retirement System Board, but there are plenty of other places for the interest to put their money. So John Perez likely could raise more money for November, but Betty Yee may have a better ballot label attraction for the voters.
And also a woman running against a woman, and generally when women run against women, Democratic women tend to do better in California.
I would agree with that.
I want to talk about the governor's race. Diane Harkey, a Republican running for the BOE, recently predicted that Governor Brown would be back for a second term. I thought that was an interesting comment on her part. But let's talk about the Republicans in the race. Neil Kashkari, Tim Donnelly, the convicted sex offender. Where do we go from here?
Well, there's a Laguna Beach mayor too,
okay,
who's actually polling ahead of Neil Kashkari in some of the more recent polls. Neil Kashkari is a very attractive candidate for the California Republican Party, like Ashley Swearingen, a possible future candidate. The question became, did he wait too long to actually jump into the race? He held off until, I believe, the month of February to actually file.
Is he attractive given his connection to TARP, which I think would be a bigger problem for Republican voters and Democratic voters?
That's a big question. Could he get through the Republican primary? I don't think TARP is the issue that keeps him from getting through. It's not a Republican primary, but garnering sufficient Republican votes to get through the top two primary. I think his more moderate social policies are what makes him have a hard time getting enough votes when you have a very strong Tea Party-esque type candidate such as Tim Donnelly.
Let's talk about Tim. You could say a lot of things about him, but he is passionate. He's well-spoken. He can articulate his positions with a sense of self. What do you make of Mr. Donnelly?
Well, it is truly remarkable. He is somewhat the counterpart to Jerry Brown. Not that Jerry Brown is an overly partisan guy. He certainly is not, and that's why he's over 50% already in the polls. But Jerry Brown's very plain spoken. He tells it as it is, and I think a lot of voters like Tim Donnelly because he tells it the way he sees it. Now the question is, can he tell it like he sees it for June and get through into the top two and be relevant in the November election?
What do you think?
I think it's going to be very hard for Tim Donnelly to be relevant in the November election.
Does he wind up in the November election?
I think that's most likely, and Republican strategists are very concerned about what that might do down ballot, particularly in terms of turning off women voters and moderate Latino voters, some of whom have been crossing over to the Republican Party lately.
If Mr. Donnelly is the nominee, what do you think happens in November?
I think Jerry Brown, the question becomes how close to 60% does Jerry Brown get?
Does he break it? Mr. Obama did.
Mr. Obama broke 60%. We haven't had, really since Earl Warren, I think, we haven't had somebody break 60%. That'll be it's a pretty high ceiling to reach. It'll be close.
His name is Scott Lay. He is the editor of the Nooner at AroundTheCapital.com. My name is Brad Pomerance, and this is California Edition, coming to you from Sacramento.